Hi guys, welcome to the Web Development Training Week 2. This week we are going to be treating CSS. Last week we did HTML and we treated a lot of topics in HTML. So this week we are going to be looking at a lot of things in CSS and in the subsequent week too as well. So let's go straight in. Now, I'm going to rearrange my folders. I'm going to rearrange my folders in my root folder, which is the web development folder. I'm going to rearrange all of these files. So what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to create a new folder and I'm going to call it HTML folder. HTML folder. And I'm going to copy all of this here. I'm going to copy all of this and I'm going to cut it, and here I'm going to paste it inside. I'm going to paste all of this inside of what the HTML folder. Now, and I'm going to create another folder and I'm going to call it CSS folder. I'm going to call it CSS folder. Now, in this folder, I'm going to create another folder and I'm going to call it week 2. Week 2 class 1. So week 2 class 1. Then inside of it, I'm going to create a file and I'm going to call it index.html. Index.html. Okay, I think I didn't get that spelling correctly. Index.html. That should be the extension name. Index.html. So correct. So I'm just going to comment this one. So I'm going to generate my HTML boilerplate with the help of eminent abbreviation. So HTML5. Yeah, we're good to go. So I'm going to change the title to CSS class. So we are good to go. So now in this class, I'm going to introduce some things to us. I said something last week that I was going to introduce CSS layout to you. Did I say CSS layout? HTML layout, and I said I was going to explain HTML div and span. I'm going to explain HTML div and span. So let me do that now before I go straight into CSS topic. So what is HTML div and span? So let's first of all talk about div. The div element allows you to group a set of elements together in one block. So the div element allows you to group a set of elements together in one block level box. So div is a container, a block container. I explained block the other time in our HTML class. I explained block, and which I don't want to go into that again. But div allows you to group a set of elements together in one block level box. In our previous class, while we were treating HTML, all the things we were doing, we didn't put all of those HTML elements inside of a container or inside of a box. So now let me give you a scenario so that you better understand the meaning of HTML div. Let's say, for example, you are traveling to another country and you want to carry along with you some of the necessary things that you need, something like clothes, your shoes, your documents, and other things that are important to you. So what you are going to do is to put all of those things inside of a box or inside of a luggage or inside of a bag. Then as you are traveling, you can carry the bag along. So the bag, inside the bag is contained all of the things that you want to take along with you as you are traveling. So imagine that you don't have a box. Imagine you don't have a luggage, you don't have a bag that you can put all of those things that you need. Imagine you carrying your bag, carrying your clothes, traveling to wherever you're traveling to, then coming back and you carry your shoe along, carry some of it. Imagine you're going back and forth, carrying all the things that you need. You can see how stressful it's going to be. But all you just have to do is just to put all of those things inside of a bag. Then as you are moving the bag, all the things that is inside of the bag will move alongside. So that is the importance of div. So div actually allows you to group a set of elements together in one block level box. Let's take for example in a website is built with several components. Let's say we have the header section, we have the navigation section, we have the main section, we have the section itself, we have the aside, we have the footer, we have the article. All of those parts, they are all layout, they are components of the website. So all of these, like header now, when you visit a website, in the header section you will always find the logo of the website and also the navigation, the menu where you can move from one page to another page. All of those things, you can see that all these things is done by layout. So we are going to look at div. So div is like a general container. So div is a general container that it is you that allows us to be able to group a set of elements together in one block level box. So also span elements allows you to define a small piece of content or text within a large document that needs to be styled differently than the surrounding text. So span is also a container, but it is an inline container, unlike div that is a block container. Span is an inline container, and one of the use case of span is that let's say you have a document or you have a long list of text and maybe you want to style a particular portion of that text separately from the surrounding text. All you can do is to wrap that portion inside of what a span tag, then you can style it differently. And we are going to look at the example and you are going to see what I'm talking about. Okay, let's go straight in to our VS Code and do some practicals. All right, so I have, let me come to this readme here. So my H1, I'm going to say my pet or my pet. Then the next one, I'm going to have an image. I already have the image in my, what do you call it, my HTML folder. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to the root folder, then come to the HTML folder. Then I think it's in class 1. Then cat. All right, good. So you have to have your folder arranged like this so I can get this kind of result. Then the next thing I want to do is to, I already have it copied here. So I'm just going to copy this and paste it here. I'll paste it here. You can see that I love pets such as cat. It is my best friend and it keeps me company and it is more trustworthy than human beings. So this is what, so now this, all of this, they are text. So but this particular part, this particular portion of the text, which is I love pets such as cat. This particular portion, I want to style it differently from the surrounding text. So I had to wrap it inside of what? A span tag. And I told you that span tags are what? Inline containers. Inline containers, unlike the div, which is what they call it, a block container. So the next one I have here is this particular one here. I'm going to copy this and I'm going to paste it here. So there's no need for me to keep typing it all over again. So this is just like I'm redoing the recording of today's class. I'm redoing it. The one I did, the audio wasn't coming out, so I had to redo it. Very painful actually. So I'm going to also copy this and paste it here. So this is what we have so far. Now what I'm going to do is, now let's say for example, I want to center all of these elements in my browser. I want to center each one, the image, the p tag. You know, we have 2 p tags here and the ul. I want to center everything. So I have to be doing it one after the other. So this goes to explain, this goes to show the explanation I cited, the illustration I cited while I was explaining div tag. So if I'm going to do all of this now, if I'm going to center all of this at a go, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut all of these elements here from this H1 down to the UI. I'm going to cut it and I'm going to put it inside of a what? A separate div. Inside of a div, which is a block container. So for me to write it, I just do div, then press enter, then I paste what I cut and I put it inside. So now it is inside of a div. So all of this element now is inside of a div. So this div now is serving as the container for all of these HTML what elements. So do you get that now? So please understand it. So let's proceed. Now, I want to look at CSS. What exactly is CSS? CSS is used to style HTML elements by creating rules that specify how the content of an element should appear. I repeat that CSS is used to style HTML elements by creating rules that specify how the content of an element should appear. Let's say, for example, how do you want your content to appear? How do you want the content of an element to appear in your browser? So this thing is being done by CSS. So CSS actually addresses the presentation of your HTML document, such as the color, the background color of your web page, the positioning, the layout, and all other properties that we are going to be looking at in CSS. So there are three ways that we can write CSS in our HTML document. And the first way is what? Inline CSS, while the second is embedded CSS, and the third is external CSS. So inline CSS, this is written inside of the opening tag of an HTML element. This is written inside of the opening tag of an HTML element, while embedded CSS, this is written inside of the style tag in the head tag of the HTML document. So in this class, we are going to treat inline CSS and embedded CSS, while in the next class, we are going to treat external CSS. So let us start with inline CSS, which simply means that it is written inside of the opening tag of an HTML word element. So to write a line CSS, let me bring out my notes now. Oh, I think I deleted it. Oh God. All right, so let me just create a new note. So note or CSS note dot txt, CSS note dot txt. So CSS properties or inline CSS. So now how do we write inline CSS in HTML tag? Let's say, for example, you have this H1 here. You have this H1, and in this H1, it has a content I am adding. That's the content I am adding. So let's just do the same thing to, okay, before, all right, before we do this div, okay, let's leave it like this. So let's just use this as an example. I am heading, and I want to style this I am heading with a different color. I want to give it blue. So what I'm going to do is, for me to style it, since I'm using inline CSS, and I said that inline CSS is written inside of the opening tag of an HTML element, and the opening tag is this H1 here. So the opening tag consists of the opening angle bracket, then the element name, then afterwards the closing angle bracket. So for us to do that, for us to be able to write inline CSS inside of this HTML element, what we are going to do, we are going to come to the opening tag of that element, then we press the space bar, and so I can be able to create a space. And the next thing we are going to do is to type or write the style attribute. the style what attribute. So this one here, this is the style attribute, then an equal sign, then a quote, then another quote. So this is where we are going to write our CSS property. So let's say, for example, whenever you want, for example, you have to ask yourself, what do you want to style actually? What are the properties do you want to apply to this content? Is it that you want to change the color? Is it that you want to change the position of the element? You want it to be text aligned, you want it to be center aligned, or you want it to be right aligned, or you want it to be left aligned? So it depends on what you want. So let's say, for example, you want to change the color of your heading. So you will do it inside of the quote. So first of all, you have to specify the style attribute, then the quote, then inside of the quote, that's where you're going to specify the property. So color is a property, then they specify the value, which is what red, then the semicolon. Please take note of that. It's very, very, very important. Color, then red. So CSS is all about properties and value. So this color now is the property that we want to apply on this content, and the value of the property is what red. Then we end this with what? A semicolon. We end it with what? A semicolon. And we can also apply multiple CSS properties to one HTML element. All we just have to do is, after we have specified one property, such as color red, notice that after color we have double column, then the value of what? The property color, which is red. Then we end it with what? With a semicolon. Then if we want to go ahead to add more properties, we just press space. Notice that everything that we are doing here is still within the what? The quotes. This quote here. Then I can say, okay, I want a font size. I want it to be very big than its normal size. I want it to be very big than the normal size. So I want it to be 50 pixel. Then I end it again with semicolon. So this is how it works. So let us look at it in practical in our HTML file. So let me just open this on the browser so you can see what it looks like. So here we go. So this is what we have. Can you see? This is the HTML file. This is what we have so far. So now let us begin doing our styling. So in our H1 now, or let's say, for example, for this div, which is the container actually, the div which is the container, I want to do an inline styling. I don't want the container to take the full, to cover the browser, to take the full width of the browser, all of this here. So I just want to reduce the container. So for me to be able to reduce this div, I have to use what? Inline CSS. So like I said, that inline CSS is done inside of the opening tag of an HTML element. So I come here, you can see I come here, I create a space, then I type what? Style. So this style now, I'm going to specify what do I want for the container. So I want to decrease the size of the container. So I can say width of 500 pixels. So don't worry, we are going to look at the properties of CSS in details in our subsequent class, but I'm just citing an example so that you understand what we are talking about. So I want to reduce the width of the container. So I want to reduce the width. So I'm going to say width 500 pixel. Then I save. Now notice that when I saved, the semicolon is disappeared. The reason why it disappeared is because of the formatter that I'm using. I am using Prettier. You know, earlier on, I told you some of the extensions that you are going to download, and one of the extensions is to download what? Prettier as an extension. So it's a code formatter. It actually helps us to format our code neatly and beautifully. So if I come to settings and I come to this part, settings, and I search for format, it's going to bring out this default formatter here. So I changed the default formatter to what? Prettier. So I'm going to change it to none now. And if I type bring back my semicolon and I save, as I save, it's not going to remove it because of what I have changed my default formatter from Prettier to none. So this is it here. So I'm just going to add it back. So please ensure that you download Prettier and add it as your default formatter. Where is it now? I mean, preacher, where are you? Mm, please hold on. Okay, I've seen it. Preacher. All right, so that's it. So let's move on. So now I can specify another property to it because when I save, nothing really changed actually. It's still like it's the same thing. Nothing really changed. So um I'm going to show you another property. So we can add another property to this by doing like let's say we want to add background color. So you can see background color, then we say slate gray, something like this. So you will see this now. Can you see the background color? This is the background color. You can see the width. The width is 500 pixels. Unfortunately, the size of the image is bigger than the container. So, but we can reduce the size. We can come here. Where is it? We can come here and do something like width 300. I don't think this one is something that is new to you again. Then the alternative, let us give it an alternate text. So let's say cat image. So we save, review this. Can you see? Now it's not in. Can you see we have reduced it? So this is the size of the container. This is the size of the container. Can you see? And this is the background color. We're able to achieve that using what? Inline CSS. Now observe, when you want to style an HTML element using inline CSS, all you just have to do is to come to the opening tag of that element. Then you can see a space. You don't have to make it clumsy. You don't have to. So you can create space so that you can create a space character between the element name and the style. So you write style equals then a quote. So all of these properties here of this CSS, all of these properties of this CSS will be inside of this quote. Because if it is outside of this quote, it's going to give you error. It's going to give you what? Error, please. It's going to give you error. So you can see I specify width double column 500 pixel, then I end this property. I end this particular property with semicolon, then I go ahead, create space, background color, slate gray. Can you see it? Very, very simple. So I can do the same thing too for my pet here. So let me come to the readme. I think I have a property for pet. Okay, so I'm going to say, okay, for the H1, I'm going to set a styling for H1. I'm going to say style. I'm going to give it the color of Crimson. You can see it's bringing suggestions for me. So I'm going to say Crimson. So after that, what do we have again? So if we look at it here, you will see that it has changed, Crimson. Then I want the font size to be 45 or 50. So I can say, so I'm going to add back this semicolon because I told you about the preacher. Once I save my file, once I save my HTML document, my file is going to format my code automatically. So now in formatting the code, it removed the semicolon. And I might make mistake, like if I'm saying this to those that are going to use preacher now. Now, if you don't add back the semicolon and you want to add another property, let's say you want to add the font size. Now look at font size. Now look at what it's giving us. It's giving us something different. It's suggesting color value for us, which we don't want. It simply means that we have not ended this statement. We have not ended this first property. So in order for us to end it, we need what? Semicolon. So semicolon is like a full stop, just like the way full stop is in English. That is how semicolon is in programming language. So when we say semicolon, it means that we have ended this particular statement. We have ended this particular property. Now we can move to the next one. So in order for us to move to the next one, we need this semicolon. Then we say, okay, we need font size. Font size actually deals with how the size of the contents. So if you want it to be small, you use font size. If you want it to be very big than the normal size, you use what? Font size. So when I type FONI, it's bringing suggestions for me. So what I need is what? Font size. So I'm going to click on font size, and I'm going to just do 45 pixel. So when I do 45 pixel and I save, and I look at, it's going to be very big. I see very big. So I can decide to make this my pet to be center aligned. I want it to be aligned to the center horizontally instead of being at the left side. And for me to do that, there's a property that is called text align. It is called text align. I'm not supposed to introduce this early, but let me just do it. So please don't forget to add your semicolon. Then we now say text align. Then we'll do what? Center. Then we save. You will notice that my pet now has been what? Centered, aligned. Can you see how beautiful it is actually? So let's proceed. So that's that about using what? Inline CSS. Using inline CSS. Let's say for example, this portion, I love pets such as cat. I want to style this portion so that I can give it a different color. I can just say color. No, sorry, I can say style because I need to specify the style attribute. Then I say color, and I can give it gold. If I save this now, let us see what we have. Can you see? I love pets such as what? Cat. So this is what? Inline CSS. So we're able to achieve all of this using what? Inline CSS. Please take note of that. We're able to achieve this using what? Inline CSS. And one of the downside of inline CSS, which I'm going to be showing you now, is that let's say for example, you have H1. Hmm? Let's say you have like 4H1. Let's say you have uh, 4H1. Let me just duplicate this. You have 4H1 in this HTML document, and they all have different content. You can say my laptop model, my phone model, then let's say we have this one, my shoe size, and we save. We have my shoe size and we save, and we want to specify, we want to have the same CSS style for all of these H1. Now altogether now we have 4 H1s. Now if we save, now that we save that, I will come here, you will see the all of this. Now you can see my laptop model, my phone model, and my shoe size. Now watch, we have 4 H1, but apparently it's only one. We only styled one of the H1 using inline CSS. Now the downside or disadvantage of using inline CSS is this: in the event whereby you want a particular CSS style to affect all of the H1 that we have here, what you are going to do to affect all of the H1 that we have here, and you are using inline CSS, what you are going to do is you are going to repeat the same process, the same CSS rule that you did for the first one. You are going to do it for the second one and for the third one. Let's say, let me copy this now. I copy it and I paste it inside of this second H1 here. Let me just collapse this. I paste out of this second, coming inside of this second H1, I paste. So that's how I'll keep doing it. I'll keep doing it for all the H1. Imagine if I have like 20 H1s, and that's how I'll keep repeating that same CSS style for each of the H1. And that is very, very stressful, ladies and gentlemen. It is very, very, very stressful. So I don't want this at all. Now, this will lead me to what I call embedded CSS. Now, with embedded CSS, I can do that. I can achieve that just with a limited code, and it's going to affect all the H1s that I have in my code, in my HTML document. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to uncomment, I'm going to undo all of this, undo it. I'm going to undo it. So I'm going to show you how we can achieve this in using embedded CSS. So let's go to embedded. embedded CSS, this is written inside of a style tag in the head tag of the HTML document. So let's start with HTML document, head tag, then style tag. So we'll come here. This is the entire page here is the HTML document. So let's just look for head tag. So this is the head tag. So embedded CSS is written inside of the head tag of the HTML. It is written inside of the head tag of the HTML. So we'll come here. So inside of this head tag, that's where we are going to write what? The embedded CSS. So you can write it either before the title tag or after the title tag. So I'm going to write it after the title tag. So I'm going to come here. After the title tag, I'm going to press enter. Notice that I am still inside of my head tag in my HTML document. So the next thing I'm going to do is to write the style tag. So I'll say style tag. So now you can see the progression. For inline CSS, you need what? The style attribute inside of the opening tag of the HTML element. But in embedded CSS, you need what? The style tag inside of the head tag of the HTML document. You can see how it is being played out now. Now that we have created the style tag inside of the head tag of the HTML document, now this will lead me to CSS selector. I'm going to explain CSS selector to you before we now continue with the embedded CSS. Now, what is CSS selector? CSS selectors are used to select the HTML elements you want to style. I repeat, CSS selectors are used to style the HTML elements you want to style. Are used to select the HTML elements you want to style. So, to set a style rule to an HTML element, we must first set the element and provide the properties and value we want to apply to that element. So, let us look at an example, e.g. selector. So you select the HTML element, then a curly bracket, then the property that you want to apply to that element, then the value, you end it with a semicolon. Then you can add other properties as well. Now, the first CSS selector that we are going to be looking at today, actually we are going to be looking at 3, but the first CSS selector we are going to be looking at today is what? The type or element selector. The type or element selector. So this kind of selector actually selects the element name. It selects what? The element name. So let's say, for example, let me come to my note. Let's say I want to select what? H1. And you know I am not using inline CSS where I have to write it inside of the what? Opening tag of the element. But now I am writing it inside of what? Using embedded CSS. So for me to do that, I'll first of all select what? The element name. So once the element name is H1. So we want to style H1. So we are going to select the element. They'll say H1. That's the element name. So this is a selector. So this type of selector is called what? Type or element selector. So please take note. Type or element selectors are selector that selects the element name. And the element name that I want to select is what? H1. So we are going to say H1. Then the next thing that we're going to do is what? A curly bracket. Of course, you can go and you can look for curly bracket in your keyboard. So curly bracket. So the next thing that I want to do is to specify the property. So now the property that I want to specify, let's say we want to specify color, then we'll call it crimson. Then we'll end it with a semicolon. Then we can specify other things too, like text align, then center. Text align center. Then we can specify other things such as font size. We want font size to be 45 pixel. Don't worry about this pixel or this unit and measurement. We are going to look at that in details in a much later time. So this is how it looks like. So this is a types or element selector, and look at what we have here. So we are going to replicate this in our style tag. So inside of this style tag, Now we are going to select the HTML element that we want to style. So we say, okay, we want to style what? H1. So say H1, that is what we want to style. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to remove this inline CSS. I don't need it anymore. This inline CSS, I don't need it anymore. So I'm going to save. So here, I'm going to apply that same thing. I'll say color. Can you see? And I'll say crimson. Then font size, let's say 45 pixel. Then text align, let's say center. It doesn't have to be in any particular order. You can start with font size first or text align first. So please, it doesn't have to be in any particular order. So if we save this now and we click here, can you see what we have here? My pet, my laptop model, everything the same styling. Can you see? The reason why we're able to achieve that is because of what we did the embedded CSS. So you can see instead of doing it one after the other for all of these HTML elements using inline CSS, we can just do it all at once, and it's going to then all the styling that we apply here is going to affect or is going to be applied to every HTML element, every H1 element. So it's going to apply to every H1 element. So this kind of CSS is called embedded CSS. So can you see? So we use what? The element selector. We selected the HTML element, then we apply the CSS rule that we want to apply to that element. So it's going to affect all of the H1 inside of my body tag. So if I have more than 10 H1, this property is going to affect it. So it's as simple as that. So let us go ahead to transform this. Let's go ahead to transform um, this div. So instead of using inline CSS now for the div, we can transform it. We can say, okay, um, div, let us give it a width. So there's no need for you to write style again. Width 500 pixel, then background color, then slate gray. So I'll just remove this inline CSS. I remove the inline CSS, then I save. So we'll also do the same thing too for span. So we'll come here, we select span. We select span, and we'll say span. I think span has a color, give it a color of gold. So we save, then we remove the inline CSS. Then we are good to go. So can you see? If we save it now, it's still giving us the same thing. And we save it, it's still giving us the same thing. So I'm just going to remove the rest of the H1. I just use that to cite an example. I'm going to remove the rest of the H1. So also for this width and height that we specify as an attribute in the image tag, I can just remove it. I can remove it, then I can select the image here. I can just say, sorry, I say img, and I can say width to be what? 300. So I'm selecting the element name, and height to be what? 300. So I have to add pixel. So let me add pixel. So that's the unit. So if I save, still the same thing. Can you see? It's still the same thing. Nothing changed at all. All we just did is just to transform the CSS styling from inline to what? Embedded. From inline to embedded. So this is it here. Very, very simple. So please go over the video and watch it, and you'll be able to understand. Now let us move on to before we look at universal selector will be tomorrow. So let us look at class selector and ID selector. Then afterwards, we'll look at CSS specificity and the important rule in CSS. Then we'll wrap it up. So we wrap it up with these font file properties and text properties. So let's proceed with class, or let's start with ID selector. Let us start with ID selector. ID selector. What is ID selector? So the ID selector uses the ID attribute of an HTML element. Okay, before I look at that, let me explain to you the downside of Let me explain to you the disadvantage or the downside of using um, element selector type or element selector. Now, in this case, using just selecting the element name and applying a style to it is good. It's actually good. We've moved a step higher. Now, the thing is, what if in an HTML document you have like 6 images or 10 images, and you want to specify a unique CSS rule for just one of the 10 images that you have inside of your HTML document. Then you now select image in your using embedded CSS. You select image, that's element selector. Then you now apply the style. Do you know that this kind of styling, this kind of selector, element selector, whatever you apply there is going to affect all the 10 images. But meanwhile, you just only want to apply that styling to one image out of the 10 images. Then if you don't use inline, then there's another property, another CSS selector that we can use. And it is either called ID selector or what? Class selector. So we are going to first of all start with what? ID selector. ID selector. So we are going to say for ID, the ID selector uses the ID attribute of an HTML element to select a specific element. An ID is not something that is new to you. We introduced that, or we treated that in HTML while I was explaining link. I told you there are several ways that we can link. There are several ways that we can use link, and one of those ways is when you want to link a moving, like when you want to move from one part of a web page to another part of the same web page, you can use what? An ID attribute, and I explained that. So if you don't understand it, go back to video 2 of the HTML class and watch it again, then you will understand it. So now for ID selector, it says that it uses the ID attribute of an HTML element. So what we are going to do is to create an ID attribute. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that here inside of this second paragraph. This second paragraph here, this one here. So I'm going to create an ID attribute. So I'm going to give it ID, and I'm going to give it paragraph -2. So I'm going to say para2. Para2. So I've given it an ID attribute like this. So it now went on to say the ID of an element is unique within an HTML document. Therefore, the ID selector is used to select one unique element. Now, this ID that I have specified here shouldn't be used in another element. It is not right because it is a unique ID for this paragraph here. Just like your ID card is different from my ID card, it is entirely different. I can't be using your ID and you be using my ID, because if that's impersonation, and if you are caught, you'll be jailed, you'll be penalized. So which is not right. So also ID in document, you can't use this para2 again anywhere. It is not right. Are you with me? It is a unique ID of what? This paragraph. So if you want to have another ID for another element, you have to give it a different value other than para2. So I think that is well said. Now, to select an element with a specific ID, to select an element with a specific ID, you write what? Hash character followed by the ID of that element. So let's say, for example, to select the HTML element that has this ID, para2, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come here. Let me create a comment, and I'll say id selector. So here I will say um, element selector. So id selector. No, now so back to what I was saying. It says to select an element with a specific id, write what hash what character. So you type what hash. Then the following is what it says, followed by what the id of the element, the value of the id. What's the value of the id? Is para 2. So come here, write what para 2, and it must be the same. The value must be the same so that you don't have error. Then our curly bracket. Can you see? So please take note. Notice that the hash symbol and the value of the id, they are the same thing. As in, there's no space between them. They are together. Don't create a space between them, because if you create space between them like this, you're going to have error. You are going to have what error. So don't create a space between them. Join them together. Then let's say for now, this is how it's supposed to be. Then you can now specify your property. So what do you want to alter? Okay, I want the color of the paragraph to be white. So I can say color. We want it to be what? White. Then we save. Then if you look at it, can you see? It is what? White. So that is for what? ID. That is for what? ID. So now let us look at the class selector. Class what? Selector. Let us look at class selector. So let us look at class selector. So um, let's go to class selector. Now, the class selector selects HTML elements with a specific class attribute. So, for example, I want to have a class attribute. Where should I do it now? Yes, I want to do it here. Let me do a class attribute here. I want to style this first list class. Let me give it active. Start it. Let me give it active. So this class has a value of what? Active. So this is an attribute. Now, all of this here I'm doing is for you to be able to understand that if you want to style a particular part, you want to style an element, if you use element name, it's going to affect all the elements that has that name. But if you want to just style one part of it, you have to give it a class name or an ID. So now class name. So now to select element with a specific class, write a period character. Now if you want to select an element that has a class name, you want to select it in your CSS. So let's come back to the tag. You can see that all these things that we are doing here, this CSS property that we are doing here, they are within the style tag. So don't go and do it outside of the style tag, because if you do it outside of the style tag, you will have error. And once you have error, there's issue. That's when you start calling me. I need help, I need help. So please pay attention. Everything that we have been doing so far is inside of the what? The style tag. And the style tag is inside of the head tag of the HTML document. So it says for us to select a class, for us to select an element that has a specific class name, we need to write what? Period character. So say period character. Then the next one is followed by the word, the class name. So what's the name of the class? The name of the class is active. Then we'll say active. Then you can give it let's say a background color. Let's give it a background color of background color of gray now. Let's see. Okay, it's showing, but let's make it background color of what should I use now? What should I use? What should I use? What should I use? Blue. No, no, background color of yellow. Let's see. Can you see background color of yellow? So this is it here. Background color of yellow. So that is class name. Now class name and class attribute is entirely different from ID attribute. ID is unique to an element, but a class name, you can apply a class name, you can apply this class name now to any other element. You can apply a class attribute that have the same value to another HTML element, but don't do that for ID. ID should be unique to a particular element, but for class attribute, you can add it to other elements as well. So just like the way we have class active, you can add this class active to another HTML element. So whatever styling that you apply here, so it's going to affect any HTML element that has the class attribute of this value active. So that is what it simply means. That is what it simply means. So let us proceed and let us look at specificity. Let us look at where is it? Let's look at CSS specificity. Let us look at CSS specificity. So I'm going to come here. I'm going to do another. I'm going to say CSS specificity. CSS specificity. So what does it mean actually? CSS specificity. If there are two or more CSS rules that points to the same HTML element, the selector with the highest specificity value will override the others, and its style declaration will be applied to that HTML element. So there are four categories which defines the specificity level of a selector, and we are going to look at it in the order of their hierarchy. So the first is what? Inline style. The second is ID, and the third is class, and the fourth is what? Element selector. So inline styles, ID selectors, class selectors, and element selectors. So the list of all of these levels of selector is what? Element selector, followed by class, followed by ID, and followed by inline. And let us look at the practical aspect of it. Let's say, for example, this H1 here, or which one should I use now? Which one should I use now? Okay, let me just write something like um, let me write another. Okay, let me write H2 here and call it let me call it menus. I save this. Let's see what we have. Yes, menus. So this menus now. So I'm going to use that as an example for uh, specificity. So like I said, the specificity level of a selector, the list is what? Element selector. So element selector is to select the element name. So let's select the element name, which is what? H2. And so let's give it a color of um, which color should we use now? Let me give it let's say dark green. Let's give it dark green. We save. Can you see? Menus. That's that green. So menus. So imagine we now have something like a class now. We want to give this H2 a class name. So come here, we give this H2 a class name. We say we give it a class name of what? Menu. We give it a class name of menu. Menu. Let us say menu list below. Menu list below. So when you see menu list below, so it's addressing all of this part here. So we can say menu list below. So we give it a class name of what? Menu. So we now come here, we now say, okay, how do we select class? I told you to select a class attribute in CSS, you use what? Dot plus the name of that class, which is what? Menu, and it must be the same thing. So if you use capital letter, it has to be capital letter here. And I say I want to give it a color of what? Um, um, Crimson or coral. Let me give it coral. If I save now, let us see. You can see that it has moved from dark green to coral. Why? Because in specificity, class attribute has a higher level of specificity than what? Element selector. Class selector has a higher specificity level than element selector. Therefore, it's going to override the element selector. Can you see it now? So now let's do the same thing too for ID. Let's say for ID, we say ID. We give ID a value of menu 2. Notice that class is different from ID. So even though they are having the same value, they are two different attributes. So now say, okay, for ID, let me give it ID. To select ID, use what? The hash symbol. Then the name of the ID, which is what? Menu. Then I'll give it a color of brown. A color of brown. And I save this. And let us see what we have. Can you see? You're having brown. Why? It is because ID selector has a higher level of specificity than class and element. So it's going to override class selector and element selector. So the highest of all is what? The inline class, inline CSS. So that's like if I come here now and I do an inline CSS and I say style attribute and I say color, I want color to be uh, let me say this spring green. I want color to be spring green and I save. Can you see the color has changed from the brown towards spring green? It has changed from to spring green. You can see how simple it is. Now you can see the specificity level of selector. So the one that is stopping the hierarchy is what? Inline, followed by ID, followed by class, and last of it all is what? Element selector. So do you see it now? It is very, very simple. So let's say for example, you don't want this inline element to be the one dominating every other element. You don't want this color of this inline element. Let's say probably you want this coral to be the one that should be visible in the browser instead of the inline color. So this will lead me to what? Important rule in CSS. This important rule in CSS. So if the important rule is used, it will override all the previous styling rules for that specific property on that element. But please note that you don't use this. Don't use this at all in CSS. We are going to use this when we are going to be using Bootstrap, because Bootstrap has a predefined CSS styling that we can use in our HTML document, in our website. So it helps us to save time and it helps us to write less of CSS code. But in the event whereby we want to specify a CSS rule to our HTML element that is different from the predefined CSS rule in Bootstrap, we can use important rule to override every other CSS rule that has been specified inside of the Bootstrap. So that is why we are going to use important. So I'm introducing it now. Doesn't mean that you need to be using it, please. Don't use it. Touch not or use not. All right, so let's move on. Um, so for me to be able to override all of these specificity level of selectors, and I want this Coral to be the one to show in my browser. What I'm just going to do, I'm just going to put a question mark. In fact, when I did question mark, it brought out important immediately. So I'm just going to press enter. So now look at what we have. So you can see it's back to what the Coral color. So the important is going to override the specificity level of selector. It's going to override everything. It's going to override the specificity level. So that is that about specificity. So we can see that we've treated three CSS selector. First, element selector. Second, ID selector. And third, class selector. So the next one we are going to look at in the next like 5 minutes, then we wrap it up, is CSS font property and CSS style property. So we're just going to look at few of these property, like two in this text property, and we're going to look at font property. So let us look at font property. So come here, let me just type CSS font properties. So we are going to look at first of all, we're going to look at font family. We're going to look at font family, followed by font size, I think so, then followed by font width, and followed by font style. So we are going to look at this now. So when we talk about font family, it's talking about the typeface of your text. It's talking about the typeface of your text. So if you look at this now, you can see the typeface. It's not that fine. I think the default font family is it sans serif or serif? I think it's sans serif. It's sans serif. So now let's say, for example, you want to have a different font family for your website, and you want it to affect all the HTML elements. You want to affect all the text in your browser. Now it is simple, because if you want to apply a font family now, you can't just be applying it on different HTML element that has a text. So in order for you to be able to apply a font family that is going to affect all the text in your website, you are going to wrap that font family inside of the body tag. So you are going to select the body tag, this one here, because all of these elements here is inside of the body tag. So, and there's what they call inheritance in CSS, that an element, a child element, can inherit the properties that is set inside of the parent element. So now I'm going to give you an example now. So first of all, observe this typeface. Can you see? Observe this typeface. And I'm going to use something like I'm going to select the body, because body is also an element selector. I'm going to say font family, and I'm going to use this Sergio UI Aroma whatever, or let me use the system UI, just system UI. So if I click on this now and we save, look at the typeface has changed, and it has changed for all of this. It has changed for all of it. Can you see the typeface has changed for everything here? My path. So can you see the typeface has what changed? That's the word font family. So you can see what we have here. Now you can see list of font family that we have: system UI, Apple system, blink mark system format, Sergio UI, Roboto, Oxygen, Ubuntu, and all and all and all. Then now look at this, is what it means here. When your browser or your user is visiting your website and doesn't have any one of these font family, let's say it doesn't have UI, it's going to check, okay, does my system has Apple system? Okay, it has it, so it's going to use that font family. And if it doesn't have it, it's going to move to the next, move to the next, move to the next, until it falls back to the default, which is what sans serif. Sans serif is the default what font family. Sans serif is the default font family. So every computer, every system has what? Sans serif. So that's that for font word family. So sans serif is always the fallback word font family in case any other font family that you set or specify does not work. So sans serif is going to be what? The fallback. So you can see how it changed. So now notice that all the element that is inside of the border, sorry, all the element that is inside of the body tag that has a text like H1, the P tag, the H2, and the link, everything here, you can see that they inherited the font family style that we specify to the body. So it means that they inherited it by default. So this is inheritance. So all the elements inside of the body tag inherited what? The font family. So whenever you want all the text inside of your website to have the same font family, the best thing to do is to put that font family inside of the body tag. Then all of the HTML element that is title, that is text inclined, will receive the font, we inherit the font family. It's as simple as that. Shikina. So now I've showed you font size. You already know what font size simply means. So let me show you font family. No, sorry, font weight. Let me show you font weight. Let's say, for example, let me show you font weight. Let's say, for example, for this span tag now, I want a font weight. So font weight actually talks about the thickness of the font, of the text of the font, the thickness or the lightness, of what? Of the text of the font. So I can say font width. I can give it bold. You can see it's bringing values like numbers. We are going to look at that much later in the class, in our subsequent class. But let's just look at the keyword like normal, lighter, bolder, and bold. So we are going to use what? Bold. So if we click on bold, you will notice that the text is now bold. I love pets such as cat is bold. Then if we reduce it to, because the default value for font weight is normal, if we reduce it to lighter, you can see what we have here. See, you can see it's very light, very, very light. So I think I like it like this. Then the next one is what? Font style. Font style talks about how you want your text to be. Do you want it to be italicized or you want it to be normal? So you can say font style. Font style. And it's going to say, do you want it to be italic? Do you want it to be normal or oblique? But the oblique and italic is kind of looking the same thing. But the default value for font style is what? Normal. So I'm going to do italic. So I'm going to italize this text. So let us see what we have. Can you see? It has been what? Italicized. So that is for font. That is for font style. That is for font style. So let us see. Okay, let's just, by tomorrow, we'll look at other text properties. We'll look at text properties, but just go and practice what we have done so far in today's class. Go and practice what we have done so far in today's class. Please watch the video over and over again. Yeah, watch the video over and over again. So thank you. We'll meet again tomorrow.